You're listening to 15 Minutes of Flame with Robert Phoenix.
Good morning, 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 good morning. What's happening? Robert Phoenix here, broadcasting to you live. Late today, I'm sorry I'm late. This happens on Mondays. I should just make the Monday show at 8:30. Because I do that live stream over there on YouTube on Sunday nights. And invariably what happens, this is what happens on a Sunday night. I do the live stream and I'm kind of pumped up. I feel good. It's like a really good experience, good energy, and I'm kind of wide awake and I stay awake for a while. And it's hard for me to sleep. And so then I bought this fancy alarm clock. I know. Alarm, who has, short radios, clock radios anymore? I decided to buy one. So silly. And it actually has a snooze button on it. It's too easy to hit. But anyway, here we are, and here you are, hopefully. And I appreciate you being a bit flexible on Mondays. If you want to check out last night's live stream, it's available over on YouTube, and it was a pretty good show, actually. I decided to break down QAnon's astrological chart, and it was a very surprising chart, to say the least. And if you're into astrology, you want to find out more about it, of course, it's available over on YouTube. And the actual article where I have the chart posted is over on my website, robertphoenix.com. And the article contains a lot of Q information. There's going to be a part 2, maybe even a part 3. Contains a lot of information on the chart. But I start off with what happened on Saturday night in Austin, Texas, with Alex Jones showing up at his studio to do kind of an emergency broadcast kind of deal. And I think he broadcasted for about 45 minutes or so. And I think InfoWars has a new studio that they have they've been working on for a while, and I think they're busting out sort of pieces of it. So he was doing this broadcast. Jones was doing this broadcast from his new studio, and he was going to a wedding, and it sounded, for all intents and purposes, like somebody was giving their last rites to themselves. And it was kind of mind-blowing, to be honest with you, to watch it. And I had to ask myself, well, what was really going on here? Number one, what was he talking about? Why was he talking about it? And what was real or not real, or what was really happening in that moment? So to give you the backstory, Robert Mueller has been pulling in people that are close to the InfoWars camp for the last 3 days or so. And the FBI is coming in and taking them off the streets. Just pulling them right off the streets. And having them for the better part of a day or so. Think about that for a moment. You're doing your thing. You're doing your business. You're going along in life. Knock at the door. Hello? Hello, so Federal Bureau of Investigations. Is blankety blank there? And you're blankety blank. You're just like, holy shit. It's the FBI. And you open the door. Hi. What can I do for you? Well, we'd like to talk to you. We'd like to talk to you about your relationship with one Alex Jones and one Roger Stone, and we'd like to do it at our offices not far from here. We won't be long. Would you mind getting dressed and accompanying us? Could you imagine what's going on in your head at that point? And Alex Jones actually talked about this, by the way. The psychological moment where you know you're being interrogated by the freaking FBI, right? So apparently up to 14 people were snatched, brought in for questioning, and with the sole intent and purpose of trying to get information about Alex Jones and the election process and who is Jones, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what they're trying to do is they're trying to connect Jones and Stone as being connected to Russiagate, that Jones is a Russian agent. Now, this is not the first time that we've heard something like this. Alex Jones's ex-wife has accused him of being a Russian agent and put a Russian passport on her Twitter feed. What's her name? Violet? Is that her name? It's Alex Jones. I always forget her name. I blank it out on. Let me see what we got here. I just want to find her name. Hold on. I usually know it right off the top of my head, but it is Monday morning, and the cobwebs are being beaten back by Kelly Rebecca Nichols. That's her name. I don't know why I said Violet. Kelly Nichols. Kelly Rebecca Nichols. There we go. Who is Chloe Jones? So now we have people who are talking to the FBI, and Alex was going on and on. It was almost like it was like his death show. It was very weird and not out of character, because as we know, Alex Jones is a character. According to Alex Jones, this is what he said at his child custody hearing, that he's a character. Now, did he say that so that he could somehow distance himself from his so-called real identity, which is the one that parents his children? I mean, if that were me, I would certainly do that. Reminds me of a dream I had last night. So, excuse me. Just trying to get my head together here. Think through some things. So Alex brought this up and was going on and on about it, and basically saying, look, I could be finished. Because he doesn't know what these 14 people are going to say about him and or InfoWars, what they know, their connection with Alex Jones and Alex Jones' connection with Trump. Now, what came out of this conversation is that Roger Stone now has a boot on his foot. He's got a boot on his foot. Just like Hillary Clinton had a boot. Apparently, Roger Stone is now under house arrest. That the FBI actually considers him enough of a threat. Now, whether or not it's real or just symbolic, Jones or Stone is now limited to where he can go and move around and actually congregate. Think about that. Now, if you're Alex Jones and Roger Stone is somebody who is thoroughly connected, goes all the way back to Nixon, has all kinds of friends and people in both high and very low places. And there are some people, particularly Kelly Nichols, who believe that Roger Stone is actually Alex Jones's handler, in which case, what do you think Alex Jones is thinking? Like the guy that is or has been impervious to any of this is now under house arrest. So one of the things that came out last night was that, again, the FBI or what they're trying to do is nail him as being a Russian agent. And Jones came out and he swung a hard bat at Mueller. And he claimed that Mueller was the head of 9/11. Like he was the master. He was the guy that pulled 9/11 off, which is completely and utterly erroneous. Now, Mueller was complicit, especially in the aftermath of 9/11, because he was the head of the FBI, right? Like he got hired just before 9/11, right? Just before it all happened. And then they essentially buried everything. He knows where the bodies are buried. And Rudy Giuliani. See, these guys, it just completely stinks. Because here's Giuliani, he's dealing with Mueller, and Giuliani is trying to negotiate on behalf of the president, and Giuliani knows everything about 9/11. He's got dirty feet, dirty hands, dirty heart. He knows everything. There's this guy named Bernard. What's his name? Bernard. I think his name Bernard Kerik. And Bernard Kerik was second in command in New York City underneath Rudy. I think he might have been the police commissioner at that time. He was second in command in terms of like the whole 9/11. Bernard Kerik went on to actually go to jail, went to prison after 9/11. And I think that they were pretty much sending a warning to people. Of course, he was corrupt just like everybody else. It wasn't just like, hey, we're going to take you off the streets because you know too much. There's always something that they can kind of nail you on. So Bernard Kerik went to prison. Not after, however, he became like the security advisor and went into places like Iraq, and that was like his payoff. He was going to get out of the country and make a lot of money and be this quote-unquote security advisor after 9/11. So Alex Jones is pointing the finger at Mueller for 9/11, and he's being accused of being a Russian spy. So this is kind of the topic of today's show. I'm just giving you the backstory. Now, of course, Alex Jones puts himself squarely in the center of the narrative and debate about freedom of speech, on the front lines of freedom with InfoWars. All the sacrifices he's made and how it brings him closer to God. And it was a very, very dramatic kind of, classic Alex Jones moment in some ways. But again, it puts him right at the center of this conversation. Now, I looped in QAnon with this article because QAnon has stated on more than one occasion, this Q entity on more than one occasion, that there are traitors inside the quote-unquote Patriot movement, and one of the fingers gets pointed at Jones. And then, of course, there's Jerome Corsi, who's always on Alex Jones. So there's this, and this is part of the piece that I did, and how, in some ways, it's about reclaiming the truth narrative. Whether or not this is actually Alex Jones's intent, I can't be completely certain to tell you that that's what he was trying to do, but that's the outcome of it. He reclaims the truth narrative, or the narrative around truth. But I wanted to look deeper into this whole kind of this Russian thing. It has to do with Alex Jones. It has to do with what happened with Michael Flynn. And it has to do with like layers of obfuscation and a story that I'm going to read as it relates to this. So if you get into Alex Jones, and you have gotten into Alex Jones for a while, and I'm not talking about getting into him as like, oh, wow, he's great, InfoWars is great, blah, blah, blah. It's like there are some very clear discrepancies in his broadcasts, and there are some very clear lines that Alex Jones does not cross in his broadcast. Alex Jones does not take on Israel. He doesn't take on AIPAC. He doesn't take on Zionists. He doesn't take on neocons. Doesn't get into any of it. No More News is a guy that actually has, what's his name, Green? Actually has some interesting stuff on Alex and his relationship with all the above. It goes back to actually Kelly Nichols. And I believe that Kelly Nichols was involved in helping Alex build his show. It's his first wife. And during that time, you can see where Alex has some very interesting bedfellows. And one of the people that he's connected with is the same lawyer that represents the Bronfman sisters. They shared the same lawyer. It was Bronfman's personal lawyer. That was Alex Jones, InfoWars' personal lawyer earlier. You don't get that lawyer by just ringing him up and saying, hey, would you like to work for me? This is an incredibly powerful lawyer, and it just doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way at all. So there's ties through the Bronfman. And basically the insinuation is that those connections came through Kelly Nichols. And Alex Jones's business, InfoWars, was built on the back of very powerful business interests that more than likely had deep ties to Israel. Okay, this is Jeff Shmulian was a very key figure. I think the Genesis Radio Network, which is where Jones was being broadcast to and over the internet, and I think also vis-a-vis syndication, if I'm not mistaken. And there are a number of players that just line up, so you can see where there are very strong ties to Israel through Alex Jones. And of course, there's Stratfor, which is not far from InfoWars, which happens to be an Israeli intelligence gathering agency company. And so there's connections between Jones and Stratfor. So there's this underlying peace and tension between Jones and Israel and Zionism and the neocons and all that stuff, and people are always cracking on him and getting on his case, and he never brings any of it up. And he does have Steve Pieczenik on there, though. And Pieczenik was being interviewed by Owen Schroyer the other night, and Owen Schroyer, Pieczenik turned his head around, spun his head around. And he basically told Owen Schroyer that Hamas was created by Israel and is still run by Israel. And Owen Schroyer could not wrap his head around that. He just couldn't wrap his head around that. And then he changed the line of questioning with Pieczenik. Say what you will about Steve Pieczenik. The guy is totally interesting. I think he's very interesting. And he's completely Machiavellian. Steve Pieczenik knows so much shit. And his ability to recall names and players, obscure names. And by the way, remembering Muslim or Arabic names is not easy. It is not easy. The names just don't conform to, how we relate to the English language for the most part. But he's been doing it all his life, so it's probably easier for him. So Pachinik, he knows, he understands it. So I'll try to stay on point. I don't want to really get into what they talked about much, but it had to do with how this whole thing was basically a setup. These protesters and Hamas is involved, and so on, and how they connect to Israel, because Hamas is created by Israel. This was way above Owen Schroyer's pay grade, by the way. So we can see that there are links, and links that make Alex Jones very uncomfortable. He does not talk about them. How many people have done shows, YouTube videos about this very same subject? And yet, he's being accused of being a Russian spy. Now, does that make any sense? It only makes sense if Alex Jones is connected into a group and a network that would link Russia and Israel together. That, of course, would be Chabad Lubavitch. And that, if that's the case, then there could be some connections with the Russians. But what I'm trying to get at here is that the Russians are kind of a cover story for something else. Let's go back to just before Donald Trump was about to take office. Donald Trump won the election. He was flushing out his staff. One of his earliest members was Michael Flynn. And the QAnoners love Michael Flynn for a number of reasons, primarily because he's the anti-pedophile guy. And Flynn was one of the first casualties of the Mueller witch hunt. And again, the story of Michael Flynn was he was on board early. Trump had not become president yet. There was that very gray area. And he was being dispatched to, of all places, Russia. Why was he being sent to Russia? Well, it was because they wanted to play footsie with Vladimir Putin and get things off to a nice little rosy start. Did he want to bury the Steele dossier? No, I would say no to all the above. And so what happened was that Jared Kushner basically sent Michael Flynn to Russia. Now, maybe Kushner is really Machiavellian and wanted Michael Flynn out, which is possible with these people. If you ever want to understand politics and how the game works in a very grotesque and bizarre and surreal way, watch the movie Battlefield Earth, starring John Travolta and Forrest Whitaker, Barry Pepper. Watch that movie. You will understand the nature of politics. It is all about leverage and power. Power and leverage, and using all of it to one's advantage. It's an utterly bizarre movie. I have to say it's one of my favorite movies of all time because it's so strange. It's so surreal. And yet there are things that are talked about in that movie which are prevalent to the political system and how things get done. Blackmail, extortion, power, leverage, Machiavellian conniving, political cunning. So Flynn is dispatched to Russia because Jared Kushner wants to know how the Russians are going to vote with a UN resolution regarding Israel, because Jared Kushner is up to his, yarmulke in this connection with Israel. He's a full-blown Zionist. Bibi Netanyahu slept in his bed. His father, Charles Kushner, and Bibi Netanyahu were very close. Kushner has given generous amounts of money to Chabad Lubavitch. And you can just see the connections. He was sent over there to solve the Middle East peace crisis. So he sends Michael Flynn to Russia to find out how the Russians are going to vote. Now, in order for Michael Flynn to do this in a way that is going to be legal and quote unquote above board. Flynn asks Obama because Obama is still in charge. And Obama says, sure, yeah, go. That's fine. You're doing due diligence, that's fine. Meanwhile, the Obama administration is spying on the Trump administration. And let that be clear, they had wired Trump Tower. They had used the FISA warrant that was obtained by Susan Rice to spy on Trump and get as much intel on Trump. This period, this liminal period between the election or the inauguration, the election, inauguration, even the run-up to the election, it's a fascinating period. I mean, if we ever have history books and they can actually write this shit down, I mean, good luck. But it's going to go down as one of the most bizarre, treacherous, dark, revelatory periods. And I mean, in the history of this country, I mean, we're too close to it. 50 years from now, if they still have books and they're still, it depends on who wins this culture war, by the way, because we're in a culture war too. Whoever wins it will write the history books around this. And it'll be mind-blowing. So Flynn goes off to Russia to go talk to Putin or Medvedev, whoever he's going to talk to, about their vote with the upcoming UN Assembly. And then he comes back and all of a sudden all hell breaks loose. Well, first of all, how do people know he went to Russia? Well, they know because he asked Obama. Once Obama knew, he was like, well, we can use this to our advantage. And Michael Flynn was very quickly removed from Trump's administration. I think it might have made Jared Kushner happy. I don't know if it was set up, but it could have achieved two things for Kushner. One, he could have got his intel, and two, he could have dispatched with somebody who may or may not have held his vision. And it appears to be I don't believe everything that if a person is a quote unquote nationalist, I'm not sure I completely believe it. If a person is a quote unquote globalist, well, that may be chance or maybe truer than not, but I'm not really sure that I believe that as well. I mean, one of the things that I think we have to begin to wrap our heads around is that reality is really not what it appears to be. It is not as black and white as we'd like it to be, and courses of action and solutions are not as easy as we think they are. And this is why we are in a maelstrom of shit for the most part. It's not as cut and dry. This guy's a good guy, this guy's a bad guy. It doesn't always work that way. But I think there are better people and worse people. Okay? Let's be clear about that. I think that there are better people and worse people. So, I'm just setting the table here. Michael Flynn goes to Russia. He's not there for Russia. He's there for Jared Kushner, and he's there for Jared Kushner in Israel. Alex Jones is accused of being a Russian spy. Is he really a Russian spy? Or is he doing the bidding and the business of somebody else, some other country, some other entity? And this whole Russia thing, I'm just throwing this out there. The whole Russia thing is really a cover. It's a ruse, a total cover and a ruse. And I'm not saying that Russia is not involved on some level, because I think all governments are involved. And if we think that we have the big picture, I think we're deluded. We are. To say that we sit here and we know all the answers. I'm trying to bring something up so that we can look at it and try to peel it back and discuss it and see what might be going on. Okay, so this leads me into my next piece. We've got Flynn going to Russia. Remember that? Going to Russia because Kushner wants him to find out about the vote for Israel. We have Alex Jones being accused of being a Russian agent when, for all intents and purposes, beneath that, you do the digging, who's he got the connections with? Clearly does not seem like it's Russia. So I'm going to bring this story in now. And this is from, of course, Sputnik News. Trump slams boring report on Israeli-linked firm, allegedly helping him win. So here we go. I'm going to read this. Special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into alleged foreign meddling in the 2016 U.S. election took an unexpected turn and is now looking into social media manipulation by an Israeli-linked company, the New York Times reported. Reacting to the report, President Donald Trump took to Twitter to blast a long and boring story the New York Times had done. And this is from, yesterday, by the way. That the New York Times is highlighting the most expensive witch hunt had found no collusion between the Kremlin and his campaign, and now it's turned to the rest of the world. This is Trump's tweet. Things are getting really ridiculous. The failing and crooked, but not as crooked as Hillary Clinton, New York Times has done a long and boring story indicating that the world's most expensive witch hunt has found nothing on Russia and me, so now they're looking into the rest of the world. At what point does this soon-to-be $20 million witch hunt, and it is a witch hunt, composed of 13 angry and heavily conflicted Democrats and two people who have worked for Russia for Obama for 8 years, stop? They have found no collusion with Russia, no obstruction, but they aren't looking at the corruption in the Hillary Clinton campaign, blah, 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 blah. He's true. Trump is, bringing the Gemini hickory stick. Let's look at the other side. According to the report, the special counsel's team is investigating contacts between Joel Zamel, an Israeli social media expert, and George Nader, a special advisor to the leaders of the UAE, who purportedly offered to help Donald Trump win the race, the United Arab Emirates. The New York Times suggested that the third person who served as a mediator, having arranged a meeting between the two, was Erik Prince, former head of the Blackwater private security contractor. Now, Erik Prince is the son-in-law of Betsy DeVos, who's the head of the Department of Education. The alleged meeting took place on August 3rd, 2016, 3 months ahead of the presidential election, with Nader telling Donald Trump Jr. that Saudi Arabia and the UAE were willing to help his father win the election, while Zamel exalted his firm's ability to boost a political campaign. According to the New York Times piece, by that time, the company had already worked out a multi-million-dollar proposal for a social media manipulation effort to increase Trump's chances to win. Now, is there anything wrong with this? People do this all the time. They invest heavily, or they have invested heavily in social media for roughly the last, I would say, 3 elections. Social media didn't really exist in the way that we know it in 2000. But in 2004, it began to pop up. 2008, clearly, it was a player. And then 2012, it was deeply and fully engaged. The New York Times claimed that Nader transferred a generous amount of money, allegedly as much as $2 million, to Zamel after Trump was elected. There are conflicting accounts of the reason for the payment, but among other things, a company linked to Mr. Zamel provided Mr. Nader with an elaborate presentation about the significance of social media campaigning to Mr. Trump's victory, the report read. The report suggested that Zamel was questioned by Mueller's investigators, and at least 2 FBI agents were sent to Israel to interview the firm's employees. The special counsel's team also cooperated with Israel police to confiscate computers of one of Zamel's companies. This is getting interesting now. The media outlet also stated, citing sources familiar with the case, that investigators have questioned numerous witnesses in Washington, New York, Tel Aviv, and elsewhere about what foreign help may have been pledged or accepted. Zamel's attorney denied his client had participated in the Trump campaign. Neither Joel Zamel nor any of his related entities had any involvement whatsoever in the U.S. election campaign. The DOJ clarified from day one that Joel and his companies have never been a target of the investigation. My client provided full cooperation to the government to assist with their investigation, said the lawyer Mark L. Mukasey. Catherine Rumler, a lawyer for Nader, also claimed that her client has fully cooperated with the special counsel's investigation and will continue to do so. According to the New York Times, Erik Prince refused to comment on the report. While the White House did not respond to requests for comment, Robert Mueller was originally tasked with investigating Russia's alleged meddling in the 2016 U.S. presidential elections amid claims that Moscow had colluded with President Donald Trump's campaign team to influence the outcome of the vote. Russia has consistently denied any involvement, denouncing the accusation as absurd, while Trump has repeatedly dismissed the Mueller probe as a witch hunt. In late April, the U.S. House of Representatives Intelligence Committee found no collusion between Trump and the Kremlin. This is true, which prompted many officials, including Vice President Mike Pence, to urge Mueller to wrap up his year-long probe. It's not going to happen, not until he's done, not until he's turned over every single stone. I would not be surprised if Mueller doesn't discontinue his investigation until after the November primaries, or the November election, for that matter. I'm sorry, not primaries. That's my sense here. And this is what's going on. Now they're moving their investigation to Israel. Isn't this interesting? We have Alex Jones now being brought in, okay, by Mueller. Not because Alex Jones is a Russian agent, but because Alex Jones has deep ties to companies that are connected with Israel. Of course, Breitbart is connected with Israel. Okay, so here we go. This is a very interesting kind of turn of events. Now, Trump has strategically and swiftly granted the status of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. And the United States has recognized that Jerusalem is now the capital of Israel. So do you think that Trump has some vested interest in that country actually doing everything it can for Trump through his presidency? Now, it's really interesting. I'm going to bring this back to Steve Pieczenik, because this is, again, I don't claim to know all these answers, but I'm trying to sort through these things and look at it from my perspective so you may be able to see it from a different angle. Now, Schroer the other night was questioning Pieczenik and trying to figure out what's going on. And Pieczenik was basically saying that what's happening in Jerusalem and the Middle East is due in large part to Benjamin Netanyahu creating a ton of chaos, and that the chaos actually helps him and supports him because he is under an extreme amount of pressure in Israel due to the fact that he's got a corrupt administration, has been corrupt for quite a long time. And this helps him create distractions, minefields, anything that will turn the focus and attention away from him. So he believes that part of what is going on has to do with the fact that Netanyahu is trying to completely change the narrative. Not about him, not about the corruption, but something bigger. And Trump, in his mind, is letting him do that. And what Pieczenik said was quite interesting. And he said that Netanyahu was being, that Trump is being led around. People think that Trump is being led around the nose by Netanyahu. But Trump is actually letting him do it. And then at some point, this is what Pieczenik said, at some point Trump is going to turn the tables on Netanyahu, which, look, I have looked at Trump's chart, and I've said this from the beginning. You cannot trust Donald Trump. Even if you think you know him, even if you think you've got him, even if you think that you have plenty of either evidence or leverage, whatever, you can't trust him because it's the nature of his chart. It's the sun conjunction with Uranus and Gemini. So would he turn the tables on Netanyahu and his son-in-law and his, who knows? Or is he is he just going to go along with the program? But this is Pieczenik's take on it. But it's interesting now that we're getting the Russian. So it's like the Russian story was probably the kind of the top layer of this. The bottom layer, or the layer that's beneath it, is likely to go back to ultimately Israel in this case. It's going to be very interesting to watch and see what happens over the next week. So keep your eye on InfoWars, keep your eye on Alex Jones, Roger Stone, and this witch hunt that's been taking. And it is a witch hunt. I've never seen it with any other president. And every other president's had, again, like Obama. Are you kidding me? That second election with Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney won the. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that Mitt Romney won that election. After the first 4 years, people were not happy with Obama. And there was a lot of vote changing and vote rigging that took place, just like it happened with George W. Bush and John Kerry. I mean, that election was probably the most egregious and dirty election in terms of vote flips I'd ever witnessed. Like all the shit that was coming out from all the various precincts and people talking about how their votes were being changed. I mean, this is crazy. Absolutely crazy. And then you go back to the whole Chad thing, the hanging Chads. Every single election is dirty. And for the most part, the voting piece, to some extent, is rigged. So is Trump going to be, the sole perpetrator of a dirty process? It's highly doubtful. I mean, I think if we're going into the, clearing the slate and hitting that reset button, if it came out that this process was dirty and they went back and basically excavated the last 4 or 5 elections, at the very least, I wouldn't have a problem with it if that was the case. But they won't. They'll never connect the dots. And history is what it is. It's buried, long gone, and sometimes even altered and changed. Okay, so we have this piece where they're starting to turn this ship, right? And they're headed towards, Mueller's thing is headed towards Tel Aviv. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Now, I've talked about on a number of occasions on this program that what is taking place is that our model of reality is, for the most part, is being shaped and influenced by 2 models. Of course, it's going to be 2. One model is the social Marxist model, which is typified by the Democrats, progressives, big government, state rule, state controls, all the resources. Corporations are secondary to the states, but still a part of the process. It's just, you saw it with Obama, right? You saw it when Obama came in, and what happened? The United States government became a huge power, or at least for a while it did, in terms of coming in over the top of these corporations, saving GM and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and AIG, and there was the whole Bear Stearns thing. I mean, all that stuff, right? The government was coming in and had to do with the debt, and they became part of the corporate entity for a period of time. And even its relationship, an open relationship with Solyndra, which was basically a money laundering operation. But that was the model. It's like, here we go. Obama was coming in, his administration was coming in, they're going to rescue all these businesses. But what it really was like this mirror for a statist collective, which is the social Marxist blueprint. Then it was right there at the beginning of the election, or the beginning of the term, right out in the open. So that's one model. And the other model, of course, is on the other side, fascism, which is different, right? So with social Marxism, the state comes in over the top with corporations. And the corporations funnel into the state. Everything funnels into the state. With fascism, it's the corporations that rule, and everything is basically funneled down from corporations into the state. Okay, do you see how that works? One is on top and the other is on the bottom, and vice versa. But it's basically the same model, which is a model of hegemonic control. And so out of that, what do we have? We have the two competing models of World War II, which is the social democratic model that the Nazis put together, and then you had the Bolshevik model that it was all put together by New York bankers. Both models were. And they may have been a bit different, but they both, they both were. And when I say different, there may have been some different players involved. Like Ford did not go in and rebuild Russia, but Ford did go in and rebuild Nazi Germany. So you have these two like competing models going on. One is neoliberal, one is neocon. One is sort of this top-down fascism that is connected to, this kind of model that Mussolini talked about, where the state and corporations become one, but it's the corporation that's on top of the state. The state becomes sort of the middleman between the corporations and the public. Meanwhile, on the other side, it is the corporations that answer to the state. Right? So it's very interesting, and there is a distinct difference. But at the end of the day, it's all about control. These are models of control. And we see this being acted out constantly. Constantly. You have the neocons versus the neolibs. You have the Zionists versus the social Marxists. And again, we're stuck in the middle of these two competing models. In a lot of ways, we're being forced to choose one or the other, and it's torn families apart. Now, I came across a very interesting piece, and this connects to the shooting in Santa Fe, which I have not gotten into at all, because that shooting is a lot to unpack. I mean, clearly they had drills, they had your typical smiling, laughing doctor. And, I can't even go there right now. I may spend some time this week and try and untangle that thing, but it's not good. It's certainly not very good at all. But one of the things that was interesting about this is that the suspect who's in custody, Dimitrios Pagortzis. Now, how long has this kid been here? Dimitrios Pagortzis. Hard to say. I don't know much about him. But he was sporting a trench coat, which has some very interesting symbols on it. One of which was the duster, hammer, and sickle, which is the star with the hammer and sickle. It's the symbol for the communists, right? And then he has the Iron Cross, which is for all intents and purposes, a Nazi symbol. But he also has a watch, which is very interesting. It's like a pocket watch, which represents time. He has the Star of Texas, and he has a symbol for Cthulhu. It's called the Bravery Baphomet. There's 4 symbols on his coat. Doesn't get much more bizarre than this. The hammer and the sickle, the symbol for Cthulhu, the Iron Cross, and the image for bravery, which is the Star of Texas. And then he has this watch and this symbol for time. Let's just take away the Cthulhu symbol and the Star of Bravery, which is very much connected to Texas. And let's just look at the hammer and the sickle and the Iron Cross. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is exactly what I'm talking about. The 2 competing models that are pulling us apart. They're trying to, compress our energy, but also pull us apart simultaneously. They're right there. They're right there in this kid's jacket. and then below them the Cthulhu thing, and then the Texas thing, and then the time. It's a fascinating kind of array of symbols. Those two are still the most important, I believe, on this trench coat, because it's symbolic of what we have to go through in order to navigate this experience we're in. And whether or not we get one or the other, and I think right now we're kind of an amalgam of the two, to be honest with you, remains to be seen. But from a psychological operation and from a spiritual pressure cooker, it's, I think, taking its toll on people, to be quite honest with you. It's clearly taking its toll on families. Speaking of taking its toll on families, looks like Sears is going to be closing 40 of its retail outlets. That's not a good thing. They're the first domino that's going to fall here between now and the end of the year. You're going to see more closings. JCPenney's is going to start to close a ton of stores, and we're staring down the end of retail. When that happens, I'm telling you right now, things are going to start to, they're already kind of dicey. Things are going to get even dicier with the fall of retail. The dollar is starting to take a major hit internationally. It's something to keep your eye on. Now the United States, through Trump, is having a pissing match with Europe. Is that happening because the United States wants to break up the EU? Is this part of the nationalist plan to reclaim sovereign territory for these countries that have been subsumed and sucked up into the Hoover of collectivism through the EU? I don't know. Is it 5D chess? Guess we'll find out. But the dollar is starting to go through a very shaky time internationally. And we have what's happening on the retail side, which is nothing new. This has been going on for, close to the last 6 or 7 years. I've been talking about these closings for a long time now, but Sears is closing 40 stores. 40 stores is a lot of people. And to just think, okay, now think about this. When these stores close, what happens to the employees? Well, they don't get money. They don't get a salary. So what happens when they don't get a salary? They don't spend their money. They don't go to places like local restaurants or Ace Hardware. They may do their nails at home instead of going out to the pedicure spa. And all of a sudden now these other businesses begin to take a hit because their people have lost their job and they don't have as much discretionary income. And it's a domino effect. It's not great. Ford, by the way, has also declared that they're no longer going to make cars. How about that? Ford is just going to solely become a truck maker. I think they're going to have one car. I think they're going to continue to make the Mustang, and that's it. Ford used to have a diverse line of automobiles. So it looks like it's going to be Chevy and Dodge. But even their models are starting. Does anybody... Chrysler, has anybody made a really great car lately? I read a story where there's a car in Germany, I forget the name of it, but it can go 135 miles per hour on the Autobahn. And meanwhile, it gets 55 miles per gallon. Think about that. It goes 135 miles per hour, it gets 55 miles per gallon at that speed. What would happen if that car was doing 75 or 80 miles per hour? It probably gets 75 to 80 miles per gallon. And this is not uncommon with European cars. Why can't we get those cars here? Well, I'll tell you why. It's because of the oil companies. The oil companies they want you to spend more money on their product. So therefore, there's all these, bullshit clauses and rules and regulations that don't allow us to either get the cars or build the cars in the same way that they're being built in Europe. Dirty little secret. Oh, man. Wouldn't it be great if somebody could actually do that, build a car like that? And not these, like Tesla, death machines. Let's get into the chat room, see what's happening in the chat room. Judy, one of the standout points to me of AJ's speech was, again, tugging at the Christians' hearts. Should Christians follow Q or should they follow Alex? Yes. Yeah, I know. Yeah, but it's really coming down to some very interesting power plays and Man, we're seeing stuff that we've never witnessed before. Susan says hello, hello, Susan, and Judy says I want the German car, please. Me too. I want that German car too. Let's do a quick little. Let's see, German car goes 135 MPH 55. MPG. Let's look this up. It's not popping. I'm going to find this car. I'm going to find out what I just read about it the other day. I'll bring it back up tomorrow. It's possible. You know, the Passats that are made in Germany, I think they also get about 70 miles per gallon. It's easy. Do you remember back in the 70s, they were making all these cars that were getting 35, 45 miles per gallon. They were touting that. And some of the cars were pieces of shit, but they were still getting good mileage. And all of a sudden they said, why don't we dial back on that? Let's give them 30. Let's give them 30 miles per gallon on the highway. They'll salivate over that. If they want something different, let them go to the Japs if they want something different. Any other comments in the chat room? I wanted to do, what were we, 56 minutes? Let's get into the time tunnel today. Today's an interesting day. Here we go. Let's take a little. I have such a great audience. Judy chimed in. She asked the question, is it the Trident Icenic Grand Tourer? Yes, Judy, it is. Congratulations, Judy. No, thank you. It is. Thanks for going there. And it is the Trident Icenic Grand Tourer. 135 on the Autobahn and 55 miles per gallon at 135. Let's go back in time. What happened? What happened in 293? Well, Diocletian and Maximian appoint Galerius as Caesar to Diocletian, beginning the period of 4 rulers known as the Tetrarchy. Back in 878, Syracuse, Sicily is captured by the Muslim Aghlabids after a 9-month siege. And Sicily's DNA and complexion is changed from that point forward. Just a year later, Pope John VIII gives blessings to Branimir of Croatia and to the Croatian people, considered to be the international recognition of the Croatian state. Otto III was crowned Holy Roman Emperor back in 1996. Otto III's claim to fame is that he was 16 years old. In 1349, Dusan's Code, the constitution of the Serbian Empire, is enacted by Dusan the Mighty. 1554, Queen Mary I grants a royal charter to Derby School as a grammar school for boys in Derby, England. How about that? Let's see, what else is really... Oh, by the way, today is the 141st day of the year. And there are 224 days left in the year. In 1674, the nobility select John Sobieski, King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania. Okay, what else do we have here? 1792, Mount Unzen near the city of Shimbara, Nagasaki, on the island of Kyushu, Japan's southernmost main island, erupts, creating the deadliest mega tsunami that kills 14,524 people. Holy smokes. There's also a pyroclastic flow. Wow, 14,000 people. It was a good day in 1851 if you were a slave in Colombia, because in this day slavery was abolished. However, 5 years later, Lawrence, Kansas is captured and burned by pro-slavery forces. And then 7 years after that, during the American Civil War, the Union Army succeeds in closing the last escape route from Port Hudson in Louisiana in preparation for the coming siege. Okay, what else do we have here? 1871, French troops invade the Paris Commune and engage its residents in street fighting. By the close of Bloody Week, some 20,000 communards have been killed and 38,000 arrested. Back in this day, in 1881, the American Red Cross was established by Clara Barton. How about that? Let's see, what else do we have here? 1911, the president of Mexico, Porfirio Diaz, and the revolutionary Francisco Madero signed the Treaty of Ciudad Juarez to put an end to the fighting between the forces of both men, including the initial phase of the Mexican Revolution, winding it down. The two rulers, the two people who were wielding power, came into an agreement. Back in 1917, the Great Atlanta Fire caused $5.5 million worth of damages. That's a lot of money in 1917. Destroying some 300 acres, including 2,000 homes, businesses, churches, displacing 10,000 people, but leading to only one fatality. How about that? Uh, 1924, of course, it's Chicago. University of Chicago students Richard Loeb and Nathan Leopold murder 14-year-old Bobby Franks in a thrill killing. Oof. Couple of aeronautical moments in history. Back in 1927, Lindbergh touches down at Le Bourget Field in Paris, completing the world's first solo nonstop flight across the Atlantic. And then 5 years later, bad weather forces Amelia Earhart to land in a pasture in Derry, Northern Ireland. She thereby becomes the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. Isn't that interesting? Same days, separated by 5 years. But today, fingerprinting was established at a state level. Back in 1934, Oskaloosa, Iowa, becomes the first municipality in the United States to fingerprint all of its citizens. How about that? On this day. Should I read this one? It's a little grisly. Let me read it for you. It's back in 1936. I had no idea that this actually existed in history. Like this event. Sada Abe is arrested after wandering the streets of Tokyo for days with her dead lover's severed genitals in her handbag. Whoa! Could you imagine what that handbag must have smelt like after a couple of days? Number one. Number two, she's Japanese, and they just don't do that, right? And she's wandering around in a daze with her severed lover's genitals. So her story soon becomes one of Japan's most notorious scandals. Oh my God. Man. 1937, a Soviet station, North Pole 1, becomes the first scientific research settlement to operate on the drift of the Arctic Ocean. What else do we have here that's remotely interesting? 1961, American Civil Rights Movement, Alabama Governor John Malcolm Patterson declares martial law in an attempt to restore order after race riots break out. 5 years later, the Ulster Volunteer Force declares war on the Irish Republican Army in Northern Ireland. 3 years later after that, civil unrest in Rosario, Argentina, known as Rosarioso, following the death of a 15-year-old student. In 1972, Michelangelo's Pieta in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome is damaged by a vandal, the mentally disturbed Hungarian geologist Laszlo Toth. Okay. I remember this one back in 1976. It was the Yuba City bus disaster, which happened in Martinez, California. I was living in the Bay Area at the time. 29 are killed, making it the deadliest road accident in U.S. history. In 1979, the White Night riots take place in San Francisco following the manslaughter conviction of Dan White for the assassination of George Moscone and Harvey Milk. That was the Twinkie defense. I remember that day. Clearly, people were going berserk. I remember listening to the accounts of it on the radio. I mean, there was a full-scale riot in San Francisco that night. Let's see. In 1981, the Italian government releases the membership list of Propaganda Due, an illegal pseudo-Masonic lodge that was implicated in numerous Italian crimes and mysteries. How about that? That's interesting. 1991, former Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated by a female suicide bomber near Madras. In 1991, Mengistu Haile Mariam, president of the People's Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, flees Ethiopia, effectively bringing the Ethiopian civil war to an end. This Mengistu character was something else, man. Not something else in a good way either. Let me just see if I get this right. Hold on. Be 1 second. Yeah. Okay, this is what I thought. Okay, so if you read the profile of this guy Mengistu, what they leave out, this is really interesting. This is so fascinating. Give me 1 second here, because I want to go back to this thing. Where was I? Mengistu, if you go to his profile on Wikipedia and look up his profile on Wikipedia, because I was just there. Hold on 1 second. I was just there on his profile on Wikipedia. They don't make any mention, none whatsoever, about his relationship with Bob Geldof and Live Aid. None whatsoever. None. He's a recipient, Mengistu was the recipient of all that Live Aid money. And he was a Marxist. He was a Marxist and then a Leninist, and he had taken over and stormed Ethiopia, was involved in a long-time war inside of Ethiopia and with Eritrea. And I'm on his Facebook, his Wikipedia page, Embracing Marxism, Asylum in Zimbabwe. There's not one mention in here about Live Aid because this absolute genocidal maniac got millions and millions of dollars from Bob Geldof and Live Aid. And the reason why people were starving in Ethiopia is because Mengistu basically took away all their rice. And so we had all these people that were, shown to us at that time. It's like, holy shit, again, it's like the children. Right? Oh my God, look at them, look at them, look at them. It's terrible. Feed the world, feed the world, feed the world. And what were we feeding? We were feeding a bloodthirsty dictator's arsenal. And not at one point, nowhere in this Wikipedia compendium of Mengistu's life is there any mention. Oh, okay. Pardon me. I've been scrolling it. It's very, very scant. Hold on. No, it's not even there. Let me just keep going through this. There's no mention. There's no mention of Live Aid and all the money that Mengistu got. Man. So that's history. Wikipedia controlling the very important fine print and details. On this day back in 1982, after 30 seasons, Johnny Carson hosted his penultimate, meaning second to last episode, and last featuring guests Robin Williams and Bette Midler. Wow, 1992. Couldn't even watch it. I was such a huge Carson fan. I couldn't even watch that. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that Johnny Carson was leaving. Let's see. What else do we have? A lot going on, right? 1998, President Suharto of Indonesia resigns following the killing of students from Trisakti University earlier that week by security forces in growing mass protests in Jakarta against this ongoing rule. This is one day in history alone. Just this one day, the 21st. It is a bloody day. This is one day in history. You have all the other days. And those are the days that are getting the headlines here. Let's see. 2006, the Republic of Montenegro holds a referendum proposing independence. If you're Montenegrin, it's a good day for you. And back in 2011, Christian radio broadcaster Harold Camping predicted the world would end on this date. I mean, that was a big deal. Remember that? I wrote a lot about that. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. All right, that's this day. This is on this day, the 21st of May. And I'm sure there's some very interesting birthdays. Do we really want to go there? In the interest of time. Let me just scroll this. Who's the most interesting person born in this day? In my estimation. If I had to pick one person born on this day, who would it be? For me. Maybe not for you. Let's see. Oh, today's the birthday of Robert Creeley, American novelist and poet, whose poems I actually like a great deal. Harold Robbins, the trash peddler, today's his birthday. Raymond Burr. Raymond Burr is a dark character. He played Ironside and Perry Mason. Raymond Burr was a very dark character if you look into his personal life. Who isn't a fucking dark character in Hollywood? Right? Fats Waller, born today, back in 1904. That's an interesting character. Anybody else? Oh, Albrecht Dürer, the German painter, engraver, mathematician. Have you ever looked at his stuff? Don't be high or in an altered state when you look at Dürer's block prints. Henri Rousseau, today, born 1844. Oh, Armand Hammer, the man who is the link between the Americans and the Soviets. If you wanted to do business with the Soviet Union, you went through Arm & Hammer. He was the guy. Oh, and business could get done. You just had to go through Arm & Hammer. That was the man. And let's see. I think that's it. All right, let's get back into All right, so Judy in the chat room. Where's my mic? Here we go. Judy in the chat room said it is the Iceni, not the Icenic. So who really hacked the election? Well, that's a good question. I would say that if anybody hacked the election, it would have been on the Israeli side. That's my 2 cents. Because again, if you factor in Talpiot and the connection that Talpiot and the Talpiot group, which is what is it, AG200, is that the group? And their connection with all these different nodes and all the information. And I'm not saying that they turned the ballots, but I would say that if there was any entity that was involved in tilting the election, it probably would have been likely the Israelis. And only because they are so adept at this point in terms of software, security, surveillance, information systems, that at some point they would have to play a role. So I hope that answers your question. But again, it's the vice grip, right? It is the vice grip between the social Marxists and the social democrats, or the neoliberals and the neocons. The high-tech guys. Bill Binney says a thumb drive took the info. Could be. Judy, you should have your own podcast. I'm serious. You're amazing. Totally amazing. All right, let's get on out of here. Go to my website, check out the new piece on QAnon in the chart. And tomorrow I'll be back with some video. I couldn't do it today because, well, it's a time thing. Let's put it that way. Tomorrow we'll do the video piece and continue my storming the gates of YouTube and moving into the 21st century. Okay, you know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to say when it's possible. Thank you.
You're listening to 15 Minutes of Flame with Robert Phoenix.